So today, we're going to dive into Karaite Judaism. It's an ancient branch of the Jewish faith, and, we're going to see how their really unique approach to scripture and tradition leads to some fascinating differences in how they practice, including how they literally mark the passage of time.
It all kicks off with a really simple but honestly a pretty profound question. Have you ever noticed or maybe wondered why two different Jewish communities might celebrate a major holiday like Purim a full month apart from each other? Well, the answer gets right to the heart of a fundamental difference in how they approach their most sacred texts.
You see, at its core, Karaite Judaism is built on this one central idea. The Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, is the one and only source of religious law. Now that's a huge distinction from Rabbinic Judaism, which also considers the oral law, texts like the Talmud, to be binding. For Karaites, the goal is always to find the plain meaning of the written word itself.
Okay, so this whole idea of focusing only on the written word, that is the starting point for everything. It's the fork in the road that leads to some very different practices in daily life and worship.
But here's a really important nuance you got to understand. Plain meaning doesn't just automatically mean literal. Karaites believe that the text itself actually gives you clues about when to take something literally and when you're supposed to understand it as, say, a metaphor or a figure of speech. And getting that distinction right, that's the whole ballgame.
So how does this actually play out in the real world? Well, let's take a look at a perfect example, the commandment about something called tefillin or phylacteries.
Okay, so check out this verse from the book of Exodus. It instructs people to place God's law as a sign on the hand and as a memorial between the eyes. The entire debate, literally everything, comes down to how you interpret those specific words.
And right here, you can see the two totally different paths that emerge from that one verse. On the one hand, the rabbinic tradition takes this as a literal command, which leads to the practice of wearing these small leather boxes with scripture inside. But on the other hand, the Karaite tradition sees this as figurative language, a beautiful metaphor for keeping the law constantly in your actions and in your thoughts.
So what's the bottom line here? It's simple. Because Karaites interpret the text as a metaphor, they just don't perform the ritual of wearing tefillin. It's a direct, visible result of that foundational principle we talked about.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about another huge area of difference that builds on this, the calendar. How you mark time, how you decide when a new month even begins, that's incredibly important, especially for figuring out the dates of holy days.
The rabbinic calendar that's widely used today is a fixed system. It's all based on these really complex mathematical calculations that are designed to approximate the cycles of the moon. The Karaite calendar, though, it's an observational one. A new month doesn't start until the new crescent moon is physically, actually seen by witnesses.
And here's a fascinating little piece of historical context for you. Both Karaite and rabbinic sources totally agree that this method, actually going out and sighting the moon, was the original ancient practice for all of Israel. So Karaites see themselves as preserving that original biblical method.
And listen, this isn't just some tiny academic difference we're talking about, because that calculated calendar is just an approximation. It can actually be out of sync with the real new moon by as many as 3 days in any given month.
And you can probably guess what a discrepancy like that means, right? It has huge implications. If your months are starting on different days, well, your holidays are going to fall on different days too.
This whole difference becomes most dramatic during a biblical leap year. See, to keep the lunar calendar aligned with the solar seasons, an extra month gets added every so often. And this means you end up with a year that has 2 back-to-back months called Adar, Adar the 1st and Adar the 2nd. Okay, so here's how it all breaks down. Both traditions have a leap year, and they both have 2 Adar months. But when it's time to celebrate the holiday of Purim, Karaites observe it in that first Adar. The rabbinic tradition, though, celebrates it in the second Adar. The result? The exact same holiday gets celebrated a full month apart. Wild, right?
So if we take a step back, what is all this really telling us? These aren't just some minor squabbles. They actually represent a profound and ancient debate about the very nature of scripture and authority.
All right, let's just quickly recap the big takeaways here. First, Karaite Judaism is defined by its total reliance on the plain meaning of the written Bible and nothing else. Second, this principle leads to really distinct interpretations, like seeing the tefillin verses as a metaphor. And third, it means holding on to this ancient calendar that's based on actually seeing the new moon, which, as we saw, has a huge impact on when major holidays are celebrated.
And that really leaves us with one final big thought to chew on.
The story of the Karaites kind of forces us to ask a fundamental question, one that really applies to any tradition that's based on a text. How much of what we believe comes directly from the words on the page, and how much of it comes from the centuries of interpretation, the lens that we've been taught to read them through?